In this tutorial we're going to look at picking up your gusset and going back to working in the round, and we're going to shape our gusset. So this is a little bit fiddly on the Sockwonders, but actually it's very rewarding when you get it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work around our heel stitches. We are then going to use the slip stitches that we created when we were doing our heel flap to pick up on both sides of the heel flap. And then we're going to work our instep stitches, work the remainder of our slip stitches, pick those up and knit them, and then we're going to be back to working in the round so that we can shape our gusset. So to start, we will knit across our heel stitches. So now we're about to start knitting along our heel stitches. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to knit across half of the heel stitches and place a marker. This is now the start of round marker. It has moved from being at the side of the sock to being here in the center of the heel stitches. We're then going to knit the rest of the heel stitches and get ready to pick up the stitches along the side of the heel flap. So what you're doing now is you're going to look at the stitches that you slipped as you were knitting the heel flap and identify them as 1, 2, 3, and you're going to count out the number of stitches that you're going to be picking up. So I like to identify them before I start so I know where I'm going, and I make sure that I've also got the right number in case I've kind of made my flap too short or too long, so it's useful to check. You can also see that it's quite distinctive where you slip them, so you have the 2 bars of the slip stitch along the whole edge of the flap, and that's why you slip them when you're doing the flap, is so that they're much more obvious to pick up. So you can put a marker here if you want, but I normally don't. So you just knit into both bars of your slip stitch, and then you do that through all of them as you go up along. So you go under both and make sure that you're all the way out to the edge as well, that you don't have the piece of the other stitch that's in from it, or that you don't pick up one of them. Then you just wrap your yarn around them as if you're knitting them normally, and then you pull back through and you've made that stitch. And then you continue to do that all the way up along the side of the flap. So again, I'm just going to go into both bars of the stitch, not the one on the outside. Some patterns call for you to do that, but this one doesn't. Again, when you're doing this, always have a look at the pattern that you're following. It won't always be the same because there's kind of a lot of different variations, but this is the most basic picking up. And what I'm showing you here is that you're picking up along between essentially your slip stitch and the next stitch in, and that creates a really neat row of stitches as you go along. So you go in and you pick that up again. Then you pick up all of them all the way up to the top of that, as specified in the pattern. And then what you do is, once you have all of your stitches picked up, so I have 8 now and I need another 1, so I'm going to pick up into the last slip stitch. And then you have 2 more stitches to pick up. And the reason you do this is to avoid a gap at the top of where the flap and the instep meet. So what you're doing is you're going to pick those stitches up along the same line that you've already picked the other stitches up, to avoid making a little hole. So if I were to knit straight into the instep stitch there, you could get quite a big gap. Once you've picked up all of the 9 stitches specified, you're going to pick up your next 2 along the same line, along that line of stitches that you've already picked the rest of the stitches up. So I'm going to pick my stitches up along there. And again, this is something that, because you're not going to be dropping stitches, you can give this a couple of goes. You know, it's something you can rip out and put back in, you know, quite effortlessly. So there's 1, and you can see that it's in the same line of stitches. So it's in the dip between the stitches and the slip stitch row, and as you go higher into the sock, it's in the dip between the row that you were beside your slip stitch and the row that the line of stitches that eventually became your slipped row. So we'll do that again so that you can see where I've picked those up, and also what it looks like if you don't do it quite right. So if you pick up 1 bar at that point instead of the 2, it'll give you a bigger hole. So definitely make sure that you're picking up the right number of bars as you go up along that to make sure you pick up, and that's what happens if you pick up too many. You'll see that it pulls out of line with the sock as well. So you are going kind of into your kind of the Goldilocks point of that pickup so that it looks exactly right and it's in the same line of stitches as the others. It's a bit of a made up, you kind of, there's no perfect pickup in knitting, but this is as close as it gets. So you're kind of trying to find yourself the two best places to pick up the stitches. So once you've those picked up, you are then ready to place a marker. And you can see here as well that it goes a little bit up along the leg. It's not in line with the instep stitches, and that's good because that's how you're trying to avoid any gappiness there. So you're going to put a stitch marker in, and this is your start of instep stitch marker, and it's really important because there's a lot of shaping that takes place around this in a minute. So once you've placed your marker, you're now ready to knit across your instep stitches, and you don't do anything special with these in this particular pattern. However, if you were picking these up or you were starting to knit these again, having left them on the needles, and you were following a pattern that you were doing in the leg, you might see an instruction in the pattern that says continue pattern as set. So for example, if you were working a particular panel at this point, or you were knitting a colour work piece, it would tell you in the pattern that you were to continue working that down along from the leg. And it's just worth bearing that in mind, that that is an instruction you might see in other patterns. But in this you just knit straight across because we're going back to knitting stocking stitch in the round. So once you've knit the rest of your instep stitches, you can see that we're going to be picking up down the other side. So we're going to be picking up 2 stitches up into the leg, and we're going to be picking up the other 9, and then you place your marker as well. So this is the end of instep marker that you've just placed, and that matches the other side. And that again is important because your shaping takes place before and after your instep, and those markers are what tell you what to do. So what you're doing here now is you're finding your 9 stitches that you're going to pick up, 9 in this case. If you're following a bigger size, it'll be more stitches, but it's the number that you're told. And so what you do is find the first of those that you're going to pick up, and then from there come up along the sock and on the stitch rows, stitch lines, stitch lines as you did on the other side, to make sure that you're picking them up in line so that they look right. Now I have a little bit of a baggy stitch there, and that happens sometimes, and it's something that you can even out by moving your stitches later on. But right now pull it nice and tight so that you pull your first stitch in beside your instep. And again, these 2 stitches that you're picking up along the side are to bridge that gap that might happen if you went straight from your instep to picking up your slip stitches. So we're now about to work the first of our instep stitches into the slip stitches, and again, as we did on the other side, you're picking up both bars, not the one bar, both bars. And then as you're going down, and you can see here that we've created a nice line along the stitch line, as we were talking about that Goldilocks zone. And again, you can see how that is quite neat. And that's what you're aiming for, to pick them up in the same line. So you pick up and knit all of the rest of your stitches all the way down to the start of your heel stitches again. I split that in every tutorial I have done, that stitch. So strange. So you're knitting down to the end of your stitches, of your slip stitches. You have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. So you have your 11 stitches, and then you're going to knit across to the start of the round marker again. Now you might have decided to place your start of round marker at the end here. It doesn't make any difference as long as it's in the center of your heel stitches. Just going to knit that now to put them on. And as you can see, you have now picked up the gusset of your sock. Once you have all your stitches picked up and your heel stitches below the instep markers, and then you have your instep stitches still between your 2 instep markers. So now that you have picked up your gusset and gotten back to working the round, you're now ready to shape the gusset, and we will do that in just a second. Now you are ready to start your gusset shaping. So the gusset shaping is worked as a knit round, a decrease round, a knit round, decrease round, all the way back until you have the correct number of stitches for your foot. So the first round is a knit round, but it's slightly different to the other knit rounds, of course. So what you're doing in this is you're going to be knitting into the back of all of your picked up stitches, and what that does is it makes your knitting more, it makes it sturdier. So you're going to knit across the heel stitches. So in this case, there's 5 of those. So we're going to knit across those first, and then we're going to work into the backs of the stitches that we picked up last time. So that's your heel stitches, and now we're going to knit into the back of these stitches all the way up to the start of instep marker. So if I were to knit into the front of those, it would be like I was knitting into a yarn over and make them quite gappy. But by knitting them into the back, what it does is it twists the stitch across itself essentially, so that it means there's less of a gap in the picked up stitch. I'll often use this technique when I'm picking up necklines as well, even if the pattern doesn't specify it, because it just means that there's less of a pull in your stitch. So you can see that those are crossed and it gives you a nice tight finish. So you will do that only in this round and only in the stitches that you picked up. So you can see that that's kind of a lot firmer than it would be if you'd knit into the fronts of those stitches. So now we're coming to the instep marker, which we're going to slip, and then you're just going to knit across. And again, as I said when we were doing the gusset pickup, you might be continuing pattern as set up here as well. Now if there's anything odd or that needs to occur in your shaping area, the pattern will specify that as well, because if you're changing colors or anything in the gusset, because you're doing decreases, it'll be specified in the pattern. There isn't any color work or anything in this pattern, but just something to keep an eye on when you do other patterns where there's more ornate stitch work. So then you just knit across your instep stitches to the end of instep marker, and then you are going to knit into the back of these stitches as well as you come to them. So again, as you did on the other side, into the back to cross those stitches over themselves to give you that tight effect, rather than to have holes that you would have if you knit into the fronts of those stitches. So once you are there, you're going to knit back to the start of round marker, and you will be ready to do the first decrease round of your shaping. Now you do not knit into the back of these stitches, so make sure that you know where your heel stitches begin. So we're now back to the start of that round. You can see here again that those stitches are all twisted and nice and tight and ready to be shaped. So the shaping takes place around your instep markers. So you have your marker here. And what we're going to do is we're going to knit to 3 stitches before that marker. We're going to knit across, and then we're going to be at the other marker. So we'll do that now. And as you'll see, we knit across the heel stitches again, and then we're going to work up along the stitches that we just knit into the back of. And in this round, you don't knit into the back of those. Those stitches are now just worked normally. So you work up along to 3 stitches before your instep marker, and then you are going to do the decrease. It's a knit 2 together. So you put your needle through the 2 stitches, the 2 front bars of the stitches, as if it were just a single knit stitch, and you knit those together. You then knit 1 stitch, slip your instep marker, start of instep marker, and then you knit across your instep. And you can see that the decreasing is taking place along that. That's where your decreasing will take place all the way down along until you get back to the right number of stitches. So you just knit across your instep stitch now, and it's worth noting here that it is after the stitch marker that the decreasing takes place, not before it. So it's before the start of instep and after the end of instep markers that you're doing your shaping. It can be easy to decrease before the marker by mistake. So now you slip your stitch marker, you knit 1, and then you're going to be doing a slip, slip, knit decrease here. So you knit the first stitch and then you slip, slip, knit, slip, slip in and knit into the back of those 2 bars, and that creates your slip, slip, knit. Now just to say a little neat thing here, then you're going to knit back to the start round. A little neat thing is when you come, so those are paired decreases along the gusset of your sock. Now when you come to that slip, slip, knit in the next round, you can knit into the back of that stitch, and that'll create a slightly straighter line of decreases. It's not specific to socks, it's just a way of working your slip, slip knits afterwards as you come to that in the next round. And now you're just going to knit to the end of the round now, and you will be ready to work your next knit round, then your next decrease round, until you are back to having the same number of stitches that you had in your leg, and then you will be ready to do your leg. So once you're back to the end of the round, slip your marker and you're now ready to knit your next round. And then you're going to knit around, decrease round, knit round, decrease round until you're back to the correct number of stitches that you need to have. So you can see that your decreasing has started along that side, and then it'll continue along there, and the same on the other side. So I'm now going to continue working the decreases, and I will be back to you as I get those finished before we go into the foot. So now you have done your decreasing on both sides, and you are back to having the same number of stitches in your sole as you do in your instep. Your instep stitches are largely unworked, and you are now ready to knit the foot of the sock and onto the toe.